Pedro from the family Chantel has insulted Chantel Everett and her family on the show several times, but these 10 instances are the worst. Pedro from the Dominican Republic met Chantel through a mutual friend when Chantel was looking for a Spanish tutor. Pedro used to work as a language tutor back then. Chantel had gone to meet him and fallen in love with Pedro. He proposed to Chantel on her third trip to the DR, but Chantel lied to her parents and never told them she was engaged. Chantel was at fault for her family's disapproval of Pedro because she had lied about why Pedro was in the U.S. after his K-1 visa was approved. Chantel and Pedro said that he was in America on a student visa. Ever since then, Chantel's parents were convinced he was trouble. Chantel's parents accused Pedro of marrying their daughter to get a green card. Meanwhile, Pedro and his family treated Chantel badly. Pedro did nothing to change their opinion. Pedro stayed married to Chantel for almost 7 years. Pedro only broke up with Chantel once he became a U.S. citizen. Getting a green card could have been difficult for Pedro if he had broken up earlier. As years passed, and he had to fake his love for Chantel, he became more and more irritable towards her. He started acting like he was single until he filed for divorce in May 2022. Carema and Nicole Gimno were childhood friends. They grew up together in the Dominican Republic, and Carema developed a huge crush on her friend's older brother. Carema created a major scandal in the lives of Pedro and Chantel during Happily Ever After Season 4. Chantel was in Atlanta at the time and Pedro had returned to his native country for some time. He went out with his friends and took some 10 shots of alcohol. Pedro took off his wedding ring and put it at the bottom of a drink. Pedro got quite cozy with Carema on the dance floor. She declared she was interested in him. Carema didn't have much hope for Pedro and Chantel's relationship. She had somehow predicted their breakup years ago. When Chantel saw the video, she thought it was some random woman Pedro was dancing with. Chantel realized Carema was a friend of Nicole's who wanted to date Pedro. When Nicole showed Chantel the full video, Chantel wanted to get rid of everything she had shared with Pedro in her past, and it included their house. Chantel approached a realtor about selling the house where she lived with Pedro, and came face to face with her ex 9 months after their split. Chantel had organized a yard sale to get rid of the stuff in the house. She got to keep everything after their divorce, and didn't want to do anything with Pedro's belongings. Pedro had left behind some of his prized possessions, including his gardening tools and his gaming chair. Pedro used to spend more time at his gaming station than with Chantel. He was always playing video games with his headphones on, pretending not to hear Chantel. When he did start having an active social life, he didn't include Chantel. Pedro's stupid chair went to the highest bidder. Karen Everett sold it for $1. When Pedro returned to the house and found out his beloved chair was missing, he became very upset. He let Chantel know he wasn't happy that she had sold it. Pedro was never this passionate about saving his own marriage. Chantel and Pedro were fighting all the time in the family Chantel Season 4 as they inched closer to their separation. Chantel was not happy with Pedro working more nights than usual and noticed these nights were getting more frequent and later. He told Chantel it was none of her business. However, Pedro was rude and entitled. When Pedro returned, he saw that Chantel had the day off, but still hadn't done the cleaning, the grocery shopping, or the laundry, despite promising him. Chantel told Pedro she was tired. Pedro pointed out Chantel worked 3 days, and still wasn't making herself useful at home in her downtime. He didn't care that Chantel was working 12 hours a day, back to back, for 3 days. When she tried to rest on her 4th day, Pedro would nag her and call her lazy. Pedro was acting like he was the only one who worked, and that no one worked as hard as him. Pedro thought Chantel used to work much harder before, since they were grinding together, but grew apart when she stopped. "I'm sick of your lazy too," he told her. Pedro and his boss Laura had grown quite close during this rough period of his marriage to Chantel. Pedro was even accused of cheating on Chantel with his boss. In August 2022, Pedro was spotted vacationing with Laura Antonella Baroneccia and some of their younger co-workers. Pedro's intentions were questioned because he didn't like Chantel taking trips, but here he was vacationing with his boss. A different photo in September 2022 showed Pedro posing with his boss with his hand around her waist. Pedro was shamed by the family Chantel viewers who believed Pedro was unfaithful. A private investigator that Karen had hired also suggested that Pedro was close to his boss. However, Pedro is a user who could have been using even Laura to get to the top. His feelings of friendship towards his boss may have been made up. He manipulated Chantel into bringing him to the US and also used his charming personality to make these women fall for him, including Laura and even Karema, who he wanted to date after he divorced Chantel. Chantel was extremely disappointed when she found out that she couldn't graduate from her nursing college after years of hard work and despite passing all her exams. Chantel had sat Pedro down to tell him that she had passed all her classes, but the bad news was she couldn't graduate because her test average was 3 points off. Chantel was asked to apply for the next semester after she had practiced walking across the stage and had even received her sash. Pedro was confused, but instead of consoling his wife, he lashed out at her. Pedro sat in front of a depressed Chantel, making her feel bad about not graduating when he did not know anything about her RN program or how difficult it was. He didn't bother listening to Chantel, who tried to explain through tears. She wanted to graduate with her friends and start their careers together. Chantel needed a hug and kind words of encouragement from a husband who was supposed to be her cheerleader. Instead, Pedro made Chantel feel worse. Throughout their marriage, Pedro kept finding new ways to put Chantel down. Chantel had expected Pedro to be working from home a lot as a real estate agent. However, Pedro worked from office and was gone 6 days a week. He hardly told Chantel anything about his work, even though he was spending a lot of time there. He was making friends at work, and then spending time with the same people later by going out for drinks. Chantel was glad that Pedro had found something he was passionate about, but knew that it had changed him. She felt like her husband didn't like her, and they didn't have a friendship anymore. Pedro was getting along with everyone because most of the office people spoke Spanish. He felt like he was finally among the kind of people who he could vibe with. Pedro didn't realize that Chantel was spending her days off not doing anything and sleeping her time off because she was depressed. It was not a sign of laziness, but a cry for help. Pedro never showed any concern about why Chantel was so low all the time. Instead, he was disgusted that she was not working. He ended up creating a bigger rift between them. Their marital home was one of the last things serving as a common connection between Pedro and Chantel. However, the 5-bedroom, 3.5-bathroom property was sold in March 2023. Seeing Pedro for the first time in 9 months made all the negative things he'd said to her come back to Chantel. She felt like it was a mistake for her to show up to discuss the joint sale of the house with a real estate agent when Pedro had treated her so bad and evil. However, Pedro didn't share the same thoughts with Chantel. Pedro, a real estate agent himself, wished to make a profit even while they were parting ways. Their agent was going to give the couple a great profit on the sale of the property, but Pedro was upset. He thought it was unfair that he couldn't sell the home himself so they could save the $25,000 in commission that the agent was going to take. Pedro found it difficult to understand that they needed a neutral third party to carry on the sale. Pedro only had money on his mind. He was always dismissive of Chantel's feelings anyway. Chantel did everything to be kind towards her husband, and all he did was mock her. He even implied that she was his maid when he fired her for wanting a light to be repaired in one of their rooms. Pedro was rude and ungrateful towards Chantel. Once he found his independence, Pedro started looking for ways to leave the relationship. He didn't need her money anymore, and was now free to do what he wanted and talk nonsense about his own wife behind her back. Chantel reunited with her and Pedro's mutual friend, Ob Corporan, after her split. Ob insinuated that Pedro and his family were scammers who didn't have the right intentions when he married the Atlanta woman. Moreover, Pedro's former friend even told Chantel that there were instances when people used to make fun of Chantel in Spanish when she was right there. Pedro used to be with her, and yet he did nothing. Pedro had wanted to leave Chantel all along. He was just really good at acting to be interested in her food and drinks, and fists were flying, and tables were getting kicked during that one unforgettable scene from 90 Day Fiance when Pedro and Chantel's brother River got into an altercation. The fight started when Pedro pointed his fingers at Chantel's parents, asking them to shut up. Pedro then stood up, and so did River. It looked like River had thrown something at Pedro, but he couldn't even see his brother-in-law. All that the frustrated River had done was that he'd hit a lamp. He never wanted to take his anger out on anybody else. River felt bad about himself for trying to fight Pedro, but the root cause of everything was Pedro's sister, who had come to stay with Chantel and Pedro and didn't want to sleep on the couch. Chantel had told her family about some offensive remarks that Nicole had made, so when everyone met up for dinner later, the subject was brought up with Nicole denying anything happened. As expected, Pedro had chosen sides and picked his sister over his wife, disrespecting Chantel in the process. Chantel had accused her ex-husband's family of performing witchcraft when she received an unexpected package from Santo Domingo. Inside it were things she had never seen before, such as a 3-horned prong thing, which was red and black and looked very demonic. There was also a coffin inside, and Chantel was sure it had come from Pedro's family. Chantel and her family burned the box. Karen thought someone wanted to curse Chantel using black magic and had something to do with Pedro's fishy witches. Pedro ignored Chantel when she called him to speak about the voodoo box. Pedro started accusing Chantel and her family of spying on him to divert the topic from the voodoo box. He told the camera that Chantel and her family deserved to be scared because they were harassing him every single day. Pedro claimed he did not know if his mom and sister were involved in the nasty prank, but he approved of it since it was scaring Chantel, and a family Chantel star loved to see her in pain.